Hi, I'm Frances. Today I'm going to be talking about how to sew the collar from the patio dress from Gertie Sews Jiffy Dresses. I've seen a lot of people struggling with how to set the collar into the neckline, and the technique that Gertie uses in her book is actually pretty similar to a technique I've seen a lot in vintage patterns. So whether you're making this dress or another pattern that has you trying to fit an outside corner into an inside corner. Oh, this isn't going to expose properly at all. I'm just going to walk through a little of how I do it. This is my finished patio dress bodice. And you'll note throughout the video that mine is a little different than yours might be, because I plan on doing this as a zip front dress, so the front is actually only held together by pins, and I have a complete seam up the back. Let's get going. Okay, I'm starting after step 3. I've already applied the fusible interfacing to the wrong side of my front and back neck facings and my sleeve facings. So I'm going to move on to step 4, reinforcing the neckline on the bodice front by stitching 5/8 inch in from this corner, pivoting at the inner corner. Then I'm going to clip the stitching to the point. So it's easiest to see this reinforcement stitching on the facing where there's this white interfacing. On all 4 pieces, we are going to clip into the corner that we've just stitched and reinforced. So all the way up to that corner. I'm doing things a little out of order, so this is also, I'm doing step 8 right now. Clip to the stitching in the corner for both facing pieces, and clip to the stitching in the corner for the both bodice front pieces. I'm not doing any trim on this, so we're going to skip step 5. I'm also skipping step 6 because I'm going to be doing a center front zipper instead of a center front seam. So step 7 is to pin and stitch the darts. Okay, now that we've sewn all of our darts, we can continue with step 8, which is to repeat the reinforcement stitching, which I've done, clip, and then turn under the facing shoulder edge by 5/8 of an inch and press. So we're going to take the shoulder edge, which is the short part, and turn this under on that stitching line and press. I'm going to run over to my iron and I'll be right back. Okay. Now my facings are both pressed, so you can see this little notch here on the back that the fabric has been turned and ironed over. The next step is to join these facings at the center front to the dot. Again, because I'm doing a zipper, I'm not going to do that. And after that, finishing the bottom and outside edges. I will do that because it's going to be easier to do that now before it's attached to the bodice. Okay, that's done. Next up, we are on step 10, stitch front facings to the bodice front, right sides together, starting at the center back point of the collar and ending at the center front circle. So let's lay that out. We have our bodice front, we have our collar piece out of the way. So we're going to pin these two together. You can see that my pieces are not exactly the same size. Happens to the best of us. And we're going to be ending here at this center front circle. If you were doing this normally, they would be attached, but I'm not. And we're stitching from this upper corner. So we're gonna go from this, I'm kind of cheating this to try to get these edges to line up because that's what's important. So we're gonna go from this upper corner all the way down this edge, pivot at this corner, continue down and stop the circle. And then we're going to do exactly the same thing on the other side of the front. I'm going to sew both of these seams and see you back here in a second. Okay, this line of stitching is done now from the dot up and around the corner and to the back corner neckline. If you're doing this normally, you will actually have, you know, two pieces here and this corner will be a little fiddly, but your stitching line should basically look like that. The next instruction is to stay stitch the back neckline and stitch the center back seam. I'm stitching the entire center back seam since my zipper is going into the front, but I do still need to stay stitch the back necklines. Okay, so we've been stay stitched. The next step is going to be joining the bodice backs to the fronts at the shoulder seam and upper arm sleeve seam if you have sleeves. So I'm gonna take these two pieces and match them up. Let's see, there's a notch, there's an edge. Here's the kind of weird corner. The inner corner here is not going to overlap in a way that makes sense. So we're gonna match our notches, edges of our sleeves, and then we're gonna have a kind of a flappy bit here. So where this should line up is that I'm gonna pin it first and then let you see it. And if you're like me, your notches are never quite right. So, but what you're hoping to have line up is the 5/8 line. So this, bring it up closer to the camera. This stay stitching line should match up with your clipped corner. So you're looking for that corner that you stay stitched to match up with this line of stay stitching. And it'll be the same on the other side. So we're going to stitch these seams and make sure that you don't catch the facing piece in this seam as you stitch it. Okay, my shoulder seams are stitched, so it's time for the magic, which is attaching the back of the collar to the back neckline. Okay, really this time, we are now ready to sew the back seam. You have these little extra triangles from stitching and turning the collar points. Clip them off, they are just in your way. Okay, and now we are where we should be. I was wondering why that looked funny. What you're looking for is the 5/8 line on this to overlap with this 5/8 stitch line at the center. I'm gonna zoom in a little. So we're just gonna lay these two pieces down like that. Looks pretty good. Okay, I'm gonna start in the center. I might have to cheat out a little. I'm gonna start in the center and pin outward. So you see I can zoom in. The 5/8 line on these lines up with the center seam at 5/8, overlaps. So now what I'm gonna do is basically ease the rest of this curve into these straight edges. The way that's gonna work is, this is why it was important that we had this snip in the shoulder. So we're going to match up the corners. This is a National Parks print, so don't mind George Washington's face there on Mount Rushmore peeking through. I think that's George. Be easier to see on the other side where it's just solid blue. So we're going to end up with this little diamond showing through of the corner of the collar of the back piece. On both sides, so that's where your notch was at the beginning. I think it's always better to stop your stitching a little bit short here if you're not totally sure, and then close up any remaining gaps by hand, rather than having to sewing too far and getting a big wrinkle. So I'm going to take this over to the machine and sew this seam right here, and I'll come back. Okay, the seam is sewn. This is the point where you really have to be happy with it before we attach the neck facing, because this is the last point you can mess with it. One thing I like to do on this style of collar is actually try to straighten out this corner here and run a single line of stitching around the corner. So you can see, I mean, I haven't pressed it yet. You can see I've got a little bit of puckering there that I think most of it will press out on the other side. Similar, little bit of puckering. Really hard to see in this dark fabric. Sorry, should have picked something lighter. Little puckering, should press out. Definitely won't see it with the collar folded down. And we're a little high here, but you can see the facings crossing at the collar points crossing at the center back. I probably have a little less than a 5/8 seam here, since you can see my 5/8 stay stitching, and that should have been up a little higher, but I have another chance. I have another chance to do that, because next step is applying the collar back facing. So we're basically going to repeat the same process for the facing. We're going to pin at center back. And then again, we're not actually going to end up stitching these corners. We're going to match up the corners and pin. Throw another pin in for good measure, center back, corner. But we're not actually going to stitch all the way to this corner when we stitch, because you can see the layers stop there. So we're actually, do you see this folded piece that we did earlier? We're actually going to stop 5/8 shy of this corner. And then we're going to end up turning this edge under, pressing, and then slip stitching it by hand to that front facing piece. So this is just the same seam as the last one, but the stakes are lower because everything's already in place. Now that we have this all attached, we're going to grade our seam allowances. So and now we're going to understitch. So we're going to turn the facing out and stitch 1/8 of an inch away from the seam on the facing. And then we are going to press, and then we just have our hand stitching left to do. Okay, we've understitched, we've pressed. This is what our corner seams look like now. They're not nearly so bad, and you're going to be under these lovely, loud, pointy collars. I'm going to open up the inside of mine so you can see. This is a lot easier to demonstrate on one where there's not a center seam done. So we're gonna slip stitch together these two facings here at the shoulder seam on both sides. So shoulder facings are all seamed. This would be a good time to tack them to the shoulder seam and the center back seam as well. Next up, we are going to sew the side seams, and then you either need to hem your sleeves, or if you're doing the short sleeve like me, do your sleeve facings. And there you have a finished patio dress bodice. I pinned my center front so it looks a little more like yours probably does. So there's the corners that we made, and then the back looks like that. And then this collar will probably roll over and hide any issues you have on the corners there, but they should at least be good enough that you won't see any major puckering on the back. All right, and your patio dress bodice should be done. I hope this video helped. Let me know in the comments if it makes sense, if there's something else that I can help with. And thanks for watching. Bye.